Well, collectors, here we are. It's October 17th, 2020, and we're going to do another seminar, and it's going to be on police bayonets this time. But as my tradition here, I like to show a little something from my personal collection just to get you warmed up. Some of you may have to get warmed up when you say, oh no, police bayonets. But believe me, they're a lot more interesting than you may think. But anyhow, I've been a collector of cigarette cases for many, many years. I find them very interesting, very pretty, and especially since a lot of them have personalized engravings to famous people or from famous people, and I think they're very worthwhile. So I'll just show you a few. I have a ton of them, but I'll show you a few of the ones that I like the best. And we have them here. Let me just get my flashlight. And I have them here on the table. And I'll start out with one that this piece is in a leather case with the Kaiser's crown and cipher embossed in gold. And when you open it up, it has the Berlin jeweler's name, and also inside, recessed into the case, is this beautiful cigarette case, all in silver. And as you can see, Wilhelm is applied to the silver case. And then what's interesting, when we open it up, you'll see that the Wilhelm is all held by rivets. I mean, you couldn't get better workmanship than that, huh? Beautiful thing, gilded inside. And this cigarette case, most likely, was probably given as a gift by Wilhelm. You know, maybe a Christmas present or something of that nature. But a very beautiful thing, still in the original case. And then next to it is another Wilhelm gift. This is quite beautiful, as it has the Prussian crown positioned over a blue enamel W. Very, very pretty. I forget what it looks like inside. I think it's plain. Yeah, it's plain, but it still has the elasticized bands that held the cigarettes in. And this is one of my favorites. Very, very beautiful. If you can see all the diamonds in it. It's the crown of a princess, and the letter H is beneath it. And what this is, it's a cigarette case that was owned by Hermione, Princess Hermione. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm, after World War I, holed up in Doorn, Holland. And in 1922, I believe it was, his beloved wife, the Kaiserine, died. And then the Kaiser remarried, and he married Princess Hermione. So she bought a very splendid cigarette case here. And in those days, back in the 1920s, it was looked down upon women who smoked, but they all did in secret. So this was her cigarette case, and we'll look inside. I don't think there's anything inside, but we'll see what it looks like. There's one of my tags in there. Oh yeah, just the opposite side of how the crown and the monogram is retained. But this cigarette case still remains in mint condition and has a beautiful Berlin jeweler's hallmark on it. A very elegant, beautiful thing. And this next cigarette case is probably my favorite of all. You'll see that it's in silver, and it has a Mercedes emblem in enamel on the top of it. But you'll notice that Benz is not there. This was prior to the time that Mercedes merged with Benz. And at this time, Mercedes made the motors for the aircraft during World War I. And apparently Mercedes went out to the field to inspect their motors to see how they were working. And this particular cigarette case was probably given to a engineer that the air crew must have gotten to know very well. Maybe he was retiring or it was his birthday. But when we open it up, it's really a grand surprise. Now, first of all, there's an old piece of paper here that's actually the back of an old map. So you can see that it's from an old map. And what's typed here from the period are the names of all of the pilots that were in this Jasta, which is an abbreviation for Jagdstaffel, fighting group. And if you look on here, you'll see the names Hermann Goering, Boden, Schatz, Ernst Udet, Freiherr von Richthofen, and his brother Lothar, Wolf. And actually, 6 of these names were Pour le Mérite Knight's Cross winners. And the reason it's all typed here on this sheet is this was given with the cigarette case so that the recipient could understand all of the signatures that are inside. And if you look close, there's Richthofen's signature there. And up at the top here is Hermann Goering. And all of these very famous pilots have their facsimile signatures in this cigarette case. Just an absolute incredible thing. There's Hermann Goering right there on the top. And you talk about a museum piece. Just absolutely fabulous. And as you know, these are the guys that established the methods of flying during wars and all the acrobatics and things that could be done. So just a most wonderful piece that I was able to acquire from a town just next to me, where the man called me and said his father brought this home from World War II, and his father died when the man was only 5 years old, but the cigarette case was knocking around the house for years, and he wondered if I would be interested in it, and fortunately I got him to bring it over to my house and bought it without even thinking. Just a wonderful, wonderful thing, especially if you like flight history of Germany. Next is we're going to the Kriegsmarine time, and this is a beautiful cigarette case in silver with blue enamel running around the border, and you'll see on the left corner there is a Knight's Cross with a set of oak leaves on top of it. The reason for that is that this cigarette case was awarded to Captain Zerzy Bernd Klug, who was indeed a Knight's Cross and Oak Leaves winner, and he was a Schnellboat captain. And it was given to him Christmas, Weihnachten, 1943. One thing that's curious about the engraving, Schnellboot has a letter left out of it. I bought this from a veteran back in the 1970s, so I have no doubt whatsoever about the authenticity of the cigarette case. So it just goes to show that maybe somebody was an expert engraver, but maybe not such an expert when they were teaching spelling when he was in school. So things like this actually did happen, even with a Knight's Cross cigarette box. Hard to believe, but there you are. The next box is another silver one, and as you can see, it's from the Luftwaffe. It's very interesting. It's got the applied Luftwaffe eagle on the outside, and when we open it up, did we get her open there? Yeah. It's gilded inside and still has the elastic bands in it, and it's got a wonderful dedication that was presented to General Lieutenant Kolb in remembrance of some type of a war situation by General der Flieger Wolf. It was presented on, let's see here if I can read it, 1944. A very beautiful thing here that I'm guilty of not doing the research on it. I just haven't had the time. It's funny in this business, you don't have a lot of time for things, but one of these days I'll get around to it. But isn't that a beautiful thing? And probably pretty important too. You could probably research what happened on this day that it was given and so forth. So that's that one. And this next one I like a lot too. It's all in silver with a monogram on it. Nice patina, never been cleaned. And we open it up. It's got the gilded inside. And it has a dedication here to H. Hamel, Hauptsturmfuhrer, 2nd SS Panzer, 6th Regiment 24, on his Ritterkreuz, 16 of June 1944, given to him by Freiherr von Scholz, SS Brigadefuhrer. Again, a beautiful thing here that needs to be researched, and I haven't done it yet, but it's always nice to have something with an SS presentation on it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful condition. And the last one that I'll show you, you're thinking, oh, look at that hunk of crap there. It's just a cheap thing. It's all dented up, and, you know, why are you showing us that? Well, this is one of the cases that I really like the most in my collection. When we look inside, it was presented to the great Panzer commander, Michael Wittmann, who has my namesake, and it was given to him on winning of his oak leaves on 1 October 1944, and from his crew. Well, you know, in those days, his crew certainly didn't have a lot of money, and they were probably out in the field. So they got together what they could because they wanted to do something for their leader. So they gave him this cigarette case. And you say, oh, yeah, that's not real. Yeah. I bought this from a German that I know for many years, and he found it at a Paris flea market, and he charged me the same amount that he paid for it, which was a big $150. So this is a real item here that commemorates Michael Wittmann's oak leaves, and who was more famous than that guy? Pretty cool, huh? So that's just some of the cases that I have. And now we'll go downstairs to the pool room and we'll talk about some police bayonets, okay? Okay, collectors, we've come down to the pool room here, and we're going to do some talking about German police bayonets. Before I get into the subject per se, I'm going to just talk about a little bit of the history. At this point in 1914, it's the craziest thing. I mean, you know, World War I started, but there was all kinds of animosity in Europe between the major countries, Russia, Germany, Bosnia, Austria, and even England. And as you know, the Kaiser in Germany, he was building a huge navy, immense battleships, and they were occupying territories in Africa, China, in the South Seas. And of course the British, they had probably the best navy in the world, and they weren't so happy to see the Kaiser doing all this. And then at the same time, Franz Joseph in Austria, the King of Austria, he was fighting over border lines in the Balkans, Bosnia, and stuff like that. And the Russians under Tsar Nicholas, they kind of had their eye on some of these countries too. Belgium comes to mind, and the whole thing was a big mess. And then the Franz Joseph's son, the Archduke, who was also the Crown Prince, made a visit to Sarajevo in 1914, and most of you guys know he was assassinated. Well, this was the match that at least lit the wick for blowing up into World War I. After that assassination, of course, the Austrians were extremely upset and wanted to take over Bosnia and those areas. And at the same time, the Russians were on the border of Belgium, and the French were all excited about that. And the next thing you know, their skirmishes start out between all these countries. And crazy England, who had a very sound parliament at the time and a very good government, for some reason decided that they just had to honor their agreements with France, and before you know it, the whole thing blows up into World War I. The Kaiser was assured by all of his generals that no problem, we're going to win this war in no time, and then we'll have our right position as the leaders of Europe. Well, as you know, it turned into trench warfare, mostly in France and Belgium, and it would take 6 months to gain 6 feet, and then you'd get into the enemy's trench, and they'd have to dig a new trench further on, and then they'd defeat you, and then they went into your trench, and it went on and on and on until, at the same time, the Germans were with their U-boats were sinking ships in the Atlantic. America was supplying England, and the Germans had an agreement that they wouldn't touch American ships, at least the ones that were not carrying war supplies. But as you all know, the Lusitania was sunk, and that just completely, everybody went crazy in America against Germany. And the next thing you know, America was in World War I, and thank God those extra forces from America were finally able to settle that war. It's hard to say it was really won, because the defeat of it was a lot worse maybe than the war, and millions of people were killed. It was just terrible. But after the war then, in Germany, a lot of the people, as you know, Woodrow Wilson, our president, had designed these 14 points and wanted to form a League of Nations, and this was to prevent any wars in the future. And according to those points, every country had to sit around in a league and make an agreement over things when trouble started before war started. And that was probably all a pretty good idea, but part of the problem was that the Allies wanted to make Germany suffer. So they imposed huge restrictions on war machines that could be built. The reparations that had to be paid were unbelievable, and it just put Germany into a terrible economy in the early 1920s, and you've all seen those pictures of there was such inflation that it took a wheelbarrow of marks to buy a loaf of bread. But at the same time, too, right before the end of the war, the Russian Tsar, the people in Russia were carrying on. The Tsar was kind of acting like Louis XVI or something. The Tsar and his family had everything, and the Russian people had nothing to eat. They were all starving. 98% of them were peasants. And this guy Lenin, along with a lot of others, came up with a new plan, Bolshevism. And through a lot of demonstrations, they were actually able to take over the government. And of course, what they did too, they also arrested Tsar Nicholas and his family, took them up to Siberia, and eventually murdered them all, including Anastasia. She's dead. I saw her coffin in St. Petersburg a few years ago. She really is dead. But Germany at this time was in all of these problems, and they were looking at what the Russians had done with establishing this new form of Bolshevism, where everybody's equal and all this kind of stuff. And to make it worse, even England was somewhat sympathetic to Russia. Actually, England was secretly funding Lenin during these times. Believe it or not, that's true. But the German people, they were just, it was a mess. They elected a so-called democratic legislature under the Weimar government, and the leaders that they had were stupid or they were weak, but the people wouldn't listen to them. So as a result, you had all of these groups of Germans, some Bolsheviks, some communists, some democracy type people, and then of course you had Hitler with his group too. So with all of this fighting, lots of places were being destroyed and set on fire, and demonstrations all over the place. And in a way, it kind of reminds you of some of the things that are happening today in America when you get into this kind of stuff where anarchy and people that believe in fascist stuff and all are starting to do all these things, and for some reason we don't want to do anything about it today. I don't understand it. But the only way to control this kind of stuff is through the police. So Germany did have a very large police force, but one of the problems was that a lot of the police sided with one group or another group, so the group that they liked was carrying on. They may not have done much to stop it, and as you all know, Hitler offered this great way of life that was going to be much better than they had before, and blah, blah, blah. And as you know, in 30 January 1933, he was elected chancellor. So, the Weimar period, we have a lot of police. And in Germany, they love to wear weapons, whether they're dress or you could use, and the police did the same thing. So we'll start out early in the period, in the 1920s, early 20s. The police mostly wore long bayonets like this, and they also wore butcher bayonets that you might have seen, and a lot of times they'll be stamped on them 1920, and this was to show the Allies that they weren't making any new weapons, they were just reusing the old type. So this is the kind of stuff you see. It's a great long bayonet with a 17-inch blade, and really a nice item. Then the police became more formal as the Weimar times went on, and they adopted a pattern for wear. Now this is what we call a long clamshell, and it has the Weimar 8-sided insignia in the grip, which is a Prussian eagle in the center. The grips were made of stag, had a clamshell, and normally they're nickel plated. This particular example is in bronze, which is much rarer, and it seems that the collecting community doesn't really know the real purpose of the bronze fittings. I don't either. Some people think it was for waterways police, and then others like Joe Watka, who is a great authority on German police, feels that there was a certain regiment in Prussia that carried brass pieces. But this is what they look like. Beautiful long 17-inch blade. Really a great piece. And you know, in your police uniform, strapping this on, you must have felt pretty proud walking around with it. This piece was made by the Alcozo firm. Now, also during the same period, the officers carried the same type of weapon, except it's slimmed down in proportion, and the blade was shorter, but it still has the clamshell and the Weimar emblem. You can see, if I hold them next to each other, you can see how the difference in the two pieces. So the officer's piece looked like this. Has a short blade, the fuller running down close to the tip. So then, here's another example here. This one has a metal scabbard, which is correct for it, and it's also one of these brass fitted pieces with a nice blade. This one was made by Robert Klass. And these Weimar pieces were, believe it or not, even during this early time, we will find them with aluminum mounts, which this one is, with the Weimar eagle. This piece was made by Carl Julius Krebs. Much more lightweight to carry around all day and probably very suitable for an officer. So then what happened when the Nazis came into power? Himmler was put in charge of the police by Hitler in 1936 when the SS was created as a separate organization, and it was Himmler's idea to completely nationalize the German police force because there was a lot of different weapons being worn in different states and places like, can't think of the, Baden, for instance, had their own specific police pattern that they wore. And there were others. Some police forces wore a short sword, all kinds of different things. So Himmler decided that we're going to standardize the bayonets that are worn by police. So what he did, he knew that there were thousands and thousands of stag-gripped clamshell police bayonets in existence throughout Germany. So why not alter those to suit the needs of the Nazi idea of what a police bayonet should look like? So what they did, and it makes for interesting stuff. This would have been a bayonet that nothing was done to. It was worn during the Nazi period. It's the same bayonet as was worn during the Weimar period with the long 17-inch blade. They just replaced the insignia on it. You'll see other bayonets. This is another brass example with the Weimar insignia, and you can just see where the clamshell was removed. See that fitting that's still there? So they just cut the clamshell off and refinished the fitting, but did not do anything with the blade or whatever. But this is not what Himmler wanted. What Himmler wanted was a weapon that was cut down in size. This was the cut down version. You can see the difference in length between the two. I'll take them out of the scabbard so you can see that now with the Nazi version, they took the Weimar piece, they removed the clamshell, the old Weimar clamshell, and put in, it's usually in an open aluminum Nazi police insignia. But also, instead of cutting the clamshell off like the piece I showed you before, they disassembled the hilt and took the whole clamshell out. Now, what that did, it meant that all of a sudden you're going to have a big gap here where the clamshell was. So they reduced the size of the grip and repositioned the hilt with new rivets in it, so that this grip is going to be shorter than the grip on the other type where the clamshell was. Can you see that? See that difference? Now, what you can tell usually when you find one of these pieces that's had the grip shortened, you'll see an old hole here. See the hole underneath this other rivet? That's where the original rivet was, so they had to reposition it, and usually they just stuck some goop in there to conceal the hole. So that's how the hilt was redone. Everybody understand that? Now then, what they also did, because Himmler thought that the old bayonets were too long, they cut the blade down from 17 inches originally to 13 inches. See the difference in the blade lengths? Now, what you'll see with these cut down types, police blades have a fuller in them. And then on the long pieces, the fuller runs all the way down and stops short of the tip. See how that fuller is short of the tip? On these cut down bayonets, because the fuller went all the way down to this point, when they cut it off, the fuller still runs to the tip because there was no way to get rid of the fuller. So then they just re-tip the blade. And you look at these, and some of them are absolutely exquisite the way they're done. You can hardly tell except for the fuller. And on other pieces, it's kind of sloppy. But it sort of talks to you. You're getting two periods of history here when you buy a police bayonet. And there's kind of a lot more to them than what you really think. And there's a lot of meat for the money. These things are heavy. They're neat to look at. They're very, very collectible. And then what else they have that's interesting too, on most police bayonets, you'll see a property stamping on the reverse crossguard. It'll have a couple of initials, sometimes some Roman numeral numbers, and then a regular digit. These numbers and letters identified from the city from which the bayonet came from, which district of police it was in, and the last numbers were assigned to the individual that was given the bayonet. So what you can do with these, you can easily look up these numbers and letters and identify this. Now there's a good book here. It's called History Writ in Steel. It's by a guy named Donald Mouse. And he was a real intellectual and did a great job on this book. It's mostly concerns Lugers, but it has a chapter in it on police bayonets, and it literally gives about 95% of the different letters and initials that you'll see and identifies them. Now let's see, like on this one, there's that hole, see, I was telling you before. This one is marked SD. So we look here for that designation and see if we can find it. Yeah, here we go. SD is listed as an area in the Prussian state, and it stands for Schutz Polizei Dusseldorf. So now that you own that bayonet, you know where it originally came from. But also another thing, that stuff meant nothing to the Nazis. They didn't care about those identification marks. And in some cases, you'll see the marks ground off. You'll see bayonets mismatched. Most of the time, the scabbard upper fitting is also lettered and numbered. Most of the time they match, but sometimes they don't. And it's really because, like I say, the designations meant nothing to the Nazis. They just wanted something for the police to wear. Incidentally, if you're interested in this book, you can get a hold of the Luger guy, Simpson. You all heard of Simpson, and he distributes this book. And it's a great book to have if you're interested in police bayonets. Okay, collectors, so a couple things that you want to look for in the Nazi period pieces. They basically come in a couple different formats. Now this piece, you'll notice, has a rifle slot in it with a working mortise. This one has a green felt still in it. You see these maybe 20 or 30% of the time. Most of the pieces have no rifle slot in them, like this one. And you also see scabbards that are black leather and are brown leather. Most of them are black leather, which meant they came from a municipality or a large city, and it stands to reason. We see more of these because there was a lot of police in the big cities. We also find them with brown scabbards and a matching brown frog like this one is. This comes from a small rural town. And again, you don't see many of them because there were fewer rural police. Just like in America, we got a lot of cops in Philly and LA and Chicago, but probably not that many in Moorestown. I think we have 32. So if Moorestown was wearing police bayonets, they probably have brown scabbards. And a lot of times on the reverse of the scabbards, there'll be maker's marks and dates and things like that. On these two, they're not, but take it from me, there are a lot of times. And also, they wore a bayonet knot with the bayonet. When you see the green mixed in it, it normally is for a rural bayonet, although this particular knot's on a municipal bayonet, so I can assume almost certainly that some collector along the line put this knot on. And this bayonet, it has a leather strap portopee. This is a cloth strap. You see both kinds, and this one has the municipal type portopee. So really, somebody ought to switch these two portopees, and then we'll probably be correct with it. But this is what you see over the years that happens. Another type of bayonet that you'll see sometimes too. This is a Nazi-made piece, and it has a aluminum hilt, so it was very lightweight, much lighter than these two. And once again, I'll show you the cut down blade stuff, and the grips filled in where the holes were. See how the fuller runs all the way to the tip, so you know it's cut down. See there again. I think this is a little better job than this one. It's got a nicer design to it. But that's what you want to see on these cut down Nazi bayonets. Now you also see things occasionally. There's a couple pieces here. These are Nazi-made pieces, but they do have clamshells, and in the case of this one, it has a dress white frog, pretty rare frog. And obviously the person that wore this was in some type of a parade or possibly some special honorary guard duty, and most likely he was an officer because this is a much shorter, scaled down piece. This piece also is a Nazi-made piece. One thing that you might like to, as a little tidbit, on the bottom mounts of these scabbards, usually they're scalloped like this one is. See how this one is rounded? You can go to the bank that's going to be made by WKC because they were the only guys that made the rounded scabbard type. So it's interesting stuff. And you can take it further with these are also both very lightweight aluminum pieces. In fact, this one was made quite late in the period, and it even has a metal scabbard. Sometimes you'll see that. This, I think, was made by Krebs. Yeah, it was made by Carl Julius Krebs in a metal scabbard with a clamshell and made during the Nazi period. I don't know why that would be. You would think regulations were regulations, but we never know all the answers in this hobby, and probably we never will. Boy, these are light. They are really lightweight. And I want to show you another piece. These are very, very valuable police bayonets. We call them the PSS. They, in my opinion, which could be disputed, I believe that these pieces were made when Heydrich and the German army went into Prague. I believe that they were made especially for Heydrich's SD forces to carry. And what they did to save money, the bayonet itself is actually a World War I piece that was etched with the oak leaves that you see here, and the oak leaves on the crossguard, and the beautiful stag grips were fitted to it with the police emblem. Probably there was so much work doing all this, they may have been better off just to make a new bayonet, but they used the same blade. This is an imperial blade, and a lot of times they'll have a supplier name on them. In this case, it does, because this bayonet was originally purchased during the World War I time. What they also did, they put new scabbards onto them, or they used the old scabbard, but they blued it with a blued finish, which this one has. And there's also an SS bayonet on it, bayonet knot. I believe these come from Prague because my late friend, Bill Lorette, he used to scour Europe looking for stuff for me. Found a lot of stuff too, I must say, but he found two of these PPS bayonets in Prague, and the chances of them just coincidentally being there are pretty slim. So I think that's where they come from. But it really doesn't matter. They're so rare that if you're going to collect police bayonets, the best piece you could find would be this SSP. And I'll show you one more thing here. As you guys know, the police were also part of the SS because Himmler ran them, and a lot of policemen were also in the SS too. And this is a piece that I think is just wonderful. There's only one other I know of that exists. This bayonet has the SS motto in gilt etched into the blade, Meine Ehre heißt Treue. So no doubt this policeman was also an SS man. It has a mortise on it, and it's unmarked, but by the shape of the pommel head, I know that it was made by the Pack firm. A very, very choice piece here, and very, very desirable. So that's some of the things about police bayonets. I hope I didn't leave out too much, but at least they'll give you an idea of what to look for. And if you start a police collection, I mean, you can start with Weimar, clamshells, cut downs, short pieces, smaller proportion pieces, officer pieces. And before you know it, you can have easily a collection of a couple of dozen police bayonets, and boy, do they look great in a showcase that's lit with all the workmanship that goes into them and all of the quality. And it's just, it's a great facet that I think more people should concentrate on collecting, because police bayonets, let's face it, Germany was a police state. So we see a lot of police bayonets, and they're still coming out from veteran families. I must get an email at least once a week, somebody wanting to sell a police bayonet. So there's a lot of them around, and they're very, very well made, and as I say, great to look at. So I hope that this will help encourage people to start collecting them. And then before I close, I want to tell you that we're going to our first show in 6 months. On November 4th, I believe the date is, OVMS is having their Militaria show in the cornfield there in Wilmington, Ohio. And normally they would take half of the convention center, but because of the virus stuff, they're taking the whole convention center and spreading the tables out. So you'll have to walk a little longer, and you also have to wear a mask. But what the hell? You can finally see some Militaria, maybe find something for your collection, sell something, trade something, and get to see all the guys. I'm sure it's going to be very crowded because most of us haven't been out of the house for 6 months. So that's a thing to look forward to. So on that note, thanks again for watching this seminar, and if I can help you with anything, send me some emails. And there's one more thing I'd like you to do, if you haven't done it already. When you look at these YouTubes, if you subscribe to it, that way you'll get it as soon as it comes out. And it also gives me some additional credibility with YouTube. It means that they'll advertise your seminars more. And right now we have over 5,000 subscribers, but boy, I would love to see that go to 10,000. I have a Russian friend, Alex, that does YouTube videos, and he has 163,000 subscribers. You can imagine how popular he is with YouTube, because you know they like to put their ads in with all that stuff. So it'll help me if you'll do that, and I'm trying to help you, so help me too. Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.